Hello, college football fans across the nation. We're back with another edition of Urban's Take with three-time national championship winning head coach Urban Meyer and yours truly, Tim May. And Urban, man, you guys, big noon kickoff. You're headed back into enemy territory again. At least that's what you used to call it back in the good old days. But you're going to State College, PA, and you're going to be there in the daytime. What do you think that's going to be like?
Well, that has turned out to be one of the best venues in all of college sport. The whiteout when we were there, I can't remember how many. It seemed like we played 100 of them.
Forever.
But the student body's phenomenal. The way they set that thing up. I'm talking about the whiteout. So I'm anxious to see what it's like as a noon game. Ohio State is the rival of Penn State. You can say whatever you want, but we are. When I was coaching, and they are now, and so the fans will be all over this one. Obviously, Penn State had a huge win against Minnesota. The quarterback looked tremendous, and this is after a beatdown they took from the Wolverines. So this is the game of the week in the Big Ten, and I think in the country.
What do you think the atmosphere will be like? I'm not sure you ever coached Ohio. You never coached Ohio State there in an afternoon situation. What do you think it will be like? Number one, you're going to get booed, but you're not going to get booed as much as you used to when you were the head coach at Ohio State, right? Because you've kind of gotten used to that going to Michigan and these other places. Big noon kickoff is gone. But what do you think the atmosphere will be like? Will it be a little more, do you think, a little more free feeling considering it's a noon kickoff?
Well, the good thing is I'm old news, so I think there'll be some people have some fun and all that. When I was up in the Wolverines, the first time was kind of bizarre, but the second one we had fun with it. And, like I said, people got a lot more things to worry about than me there at a game. And
yeah,
I'm gonna be as professional as I can. And we have some great segments about the Penn State offense against Jim Knowles' defense. That's going to be my focus this week, which I think is going to be the difference in the game. And but I'm anxious to see what it's going to be like. The whiteout I had is the number one, the most difficult place to play. You remember we lost one, but then we won several in great game. I mean, from overtime games to coming from back 2 scores down right in the fourth quarter. So the crowd, I imagine they're going to try to whip them up in a frenzy. That just means they have to get up earlier and have a few cocktails before they get in that stadium, I guess. But it's going to be, this is the game, and how the weather should be fine. How Clifford handles this defense is going to be the difference in the game.
Yeah. Let's get to it. Ohio State's number 2 in the country. Total defense. What a flip-flop. They're averaging 110, 115 yards fewer yards given up per game than they were a year ago. They're number 2 in total defense. They're higher ranked in total defense now than they are total offense, which is crazy after last week's really strange game against Iowa. A strange blowout. I don't know how you say those two words together, but what just jumped out at you now that you've seen this defense? And granted, Iowa can't get out of its own way on offense. Let's put it that way. But Ohio State beat them worse than they were averaging. You're from a standpoint of total yards. But what just jumps out at you about this defense now, 7 games in, Urban?
Well, very well coached. Obviously, there's great players. What I get anytime someone says, "Well, there's a team that doesn't have good players like in Ohio State," that's not true. Maybe the scheme doesn't fit the players, but I think this coaching staff's done a phenomenal job. Now, here's a harsh reality that some people might not want to hear, is that Ohio State hasn't really faced a quarterback that. I mean, you look at the pass offense rankings.
Yeah.
Rutgers is 122. I think Iowa was 130 or 129.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think who else we played. It's really been poor. Even Notre Dame's 110th in pass offense.
Yeah.
So my question, I'm really anxious to see, is Jim Knowles is very aggressive. They play a lot of something we call blitz zero, and that's a 6-man pressure where there's no safeties, and that's the ultimate challenge for a quarterback. However, would if the tide was turned and you had Marvin Harrison Jr. and you had C.J. Stroud, would you blitz those guys? I would say no. They're too good. And when we had J.T. Barrett, a freshman, we got a little blitz zero until we learned how to beat it. We got, you just don't do that because it's too high risk. So the question is, now they're going to face a Sean Clifford, who is experienced. He's had an up and down career, but he had a really good game against Minnesota.
Yep.
He's a veteran. He's at home. So much different when you're in a horseshoe with 110,000 people and they play that. You can't really check in and out of plays. It's communication is too hard. So uh, I'm anxious to see will they take the same approach against a veteran quarterback. The receivers are good. You know, Penn State has had not good but great receivers over the years. Their best positions are their two tailbacks. They're very fast, athletic guys. Singleton being the primary guy. So I'm anxious to see this chess match between the two of them. And will Jim Knowles play zero coverage against Clifford? Because that seems to be I'm talking about the D coordinator.
Yeah.
At Ohio State. He wants to dictate the game. That means he wants to tell you what plays to run because I'm going to show a zero look a lot. And I'm anxious to see how this goes. But reality is Ohio State has not played an offense that can throw the ball. Not one. And so I'm anxious to see what's going to happen here.
Hey, flip side of that is I wrote a story about this earlier this week after the Ohio State game against Iowa. Tough sledding when it came to trying to run. Ohio State settled for 4 field goals in the first half. They still scored in the red zone. But this Ohio State offense, my big line is that you give them long enough. That play sheet that Ryan Day has got and Kevin Wilson and Corey Dennis and all these guys generate, Brian Hartline, it's got something on there that's going to pick the lock eventually. That's the way and I thought this past week was a great example of that. Are you impressed with what I know you're impressed with what Ohio State is doing, but does that put Ohio State a notch above a lot of most other programs? Just the diversity it can bring from an offensive standpoint. Even in the passing game, it's diverse, if you follow my drift.
Yeah, the thing that separates them is first, and I did the thing on Big Noon Kickoff. What Brian Hartline has done is unprecedented in college football. And I was around the game for a long time. I've never seen a receiver room that just continually churns out. You know, and I used to get offended a little bit when someone said you can recruit whoever you want. Like, wait, what are you talking about? You know, you can recruit it. You have to beat people in recruiting. There's other people that get paid a lot of money to recruit as well. But I think the thing that Hartline does, and really Brian Day's staff, is they develop players. You know, Mickey Marotti and that it's a process of development of a player. So things, you know, you see what's going on in Texas A&M. I know we're going to talk about that. I mean, they recruited well. So so I think given especially the assistant coach is due. And that's Brian Hartline. That's Corey Dennis. That's Tony Alford. You know, the way they develop the offensive skill is remarkable. But Brian Hartline, what he's done, and I think at some point you have that talent outside. At some point, like you said, they're going to find the key to that lock and unleash it. So Iowa is a great defense.
Yeah.
I was wondering, Tim, this is during the game, I even asked Brady Quinn and Matt Leinart and Reggie Bush, I said, what would you guys, because I've been in those locker rooms where one side of the ball was playing, Iowa's defense was playing as hard as they possibly could.
Yeah.
They were in that game because they scored on defense. They held them to 3 field goals when the offense just gave them the ball. So, you know, is there infighting? Is there, you know, are there arguments? It was well documented back years ago, but when we were struggling on offense at Florida one time, after a game we lost, there was almost a fight in the locker room. And I actually let it go because I wanted to hear. I thought it's a cathartic moment. Say what you got to say.
Yeah.
I'd rather say it here than saying it to the media or something. And I wanted to hear it. So whenever you have that kind of one side performing well and the other side, the worst in the country, you know, at some point, I wonder what's going on in that locker room.
Yeah, me too. I mean, wow. And Iowa fans are wondering, you know what I mean? It's kind of like Kirk Ferentz has been there for a long time, but sometimes the explanations don't match up with what you're seeing. And, you know, like I told you last week, it's kind of hard to have an excuse for being that pathetic on offense, inept, really, to a certain extent. Quarterback throwing the ball to the other team. I mean, you know, it's just crazy. Hey, I want to get you on this. Every week, it seems like there are rivalries that kind of pop up that have been around in college football for a while that I think are underappreciated, especially as we move forward in this college football world of consolidation and whatever. You know, some of these rivals are going to go away, but, you know, you were part of this one, man. Florida, Georgia, they're playing this week. Florida seems to be flailing, but that's always a rivalry. You got You got Michigan State at Michigan. Michigan State seems to be struggling to a certain extent, but we know what Michigan State's had Michigan's number the last several years. And in Kentucky at unbeaten Tennessee, highly ranked, revitalized Tennessee. Which one of those games kind of grabs you going into this weekend where there's a possible upset in the making? What do you think?
Well, you know my feelings on rivalries. I grew up in the 10-year war with a guy named Bo Schembechler and Woody Hayes. And that was like brushing your teeth in the morning, your hatred for your rival.
Yeah.
And, you know, the one thing I was so proud of Ohio State, and they still continue this, a rivalry to me is not a game. It's a way of life. It's a way, you know, you don't work on a rivalry, you know, as you work up to the game. We had someone working every day of the year. Tim Hinton was my Wolverine coach.
Yeah.
And that means he worked on that. And I did the same thing at Utah about BYU. I did the same thing at Bowling Green about Toledo. And then I did the same thing at Florida with Georgia, Florida State, and Tennessee, actually 3 rounds.
Yeah.
So the Georgia Florida game, you know, it's not, you know, when Florida's lost 3 in a row, I believe. So I consider that, you know, I'm a little biased, obviously, but you have the Iron Bowl, you have USC, Notre Dame, and then I consider Florida, Georgia, either the second or third best, obviously behind the game here. That's a great rivalry. That is deep. The old Gators, you know, from the Steve Spurrier era, that's the rivalry that counts at Florida. So that is a huge game. It's in a venue that's a neutral venue in Jacksonville. That's a nasty game, tough game, hatred game, but it's a mismatch right now because of Georgia, the way they've recruited their program, where they're at compared to where Florida is. I think Tennessee, Kentucky is a nice rivalry. It's not the same level as that.
Yeah.
But Kentucky's a good program. And Tennessee right now, that guy's got to be coach of the year when he's done there. Heupel.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Hendon Hooker is a household name now. You know, I mean, the Heisman Trophy race, as I said a couple of weeks ago, has been joined. I mean, Hendon Hooker, he's got that momentum going in that Southeastern Conference momentum going, you know, and CJ's got it working on his hand. You know, he's got some work to do, you know, heading into this. That was cool, though, watching CJ last week, wasn't it? Just crank it up. I mean, he looked pedestrian there in the first half. The passing attack did for Ohio State. But, man, for about 8-10 minutes there in the middle of the second half, that was worth your money, right?
It was. And I think Ryan Day did a great job. But CJ struggled. And if you notice near that, they kept the ones in there.
Yeah.
And that was my plan. You know, the game was out of hand. It was over. And I think we threw the ball 10 out of 12 times. And there's a lot of reasons. Number one, you have an obligation as the coach to, if your player has a chance to, we did that with some guys, you know, when we have Heisman opportunities, you're darn right. Let that guy keep going. And then also give him some confidence as he's getting ready to go to Penn State. Because there was a moment, Tim, where the stadium felt it. I'm sure CJ felt it. There was a lack of confidence, and he got it back now in a big way.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Okay. Ole Miss is playing at Texas A&M this week. Ole Miss gets beat for the first time last week. Beat down, really. I mean, I thought LSU's coming on a little bit. But what would you do? You're the head coach at Texas A&M, Urban, right now. Well, I don't know. What do you do to fix things down there? And I'm not trying to project you into a possible another job opportunity that might be coming at the end of the year. But, you know, it'd be hard for them to get rid of Jimbo Fisher right now. But, man, he's well into his tenure there. And a lot of things seem to be unraveling. I mean, what's just your take on what's going on there with Texas A&M, loaded with talent, but where are the results?
Yeah, he hasn't had a double. I didn't realize this until this summer, you know, when that little spat between Nick Saban came up. You know, Texas A&M is a proud place. It's a place that has an enormous resource. I coached a game against Texas A&M down there, and it's incredible. It's also within 100 miles. You have as good of football players as there. You know, recruiting is over the top, and football is so important in the state of Texas. So it's hard to understand. You know, I don't want to add the narrative because I'm not inside that locker room. But we're all, as I used to explain to our coaching staff and our players, this is the most evaluation-friendly business you can be in. That means every week there's a left side of the column and a right side. You either win or lose the game, and then also people watch. And if it's in disarray, your evaluation is not very good. So there's something. They just suspended a handful of players
Yeah.
some of the highly ranked recruiting class that they had. The offensive performance has been nothing short of very bad, very poor. So and the one thing about the SEC, there's no time to take a breath ever. You
Yeah.
don't you take a breath against the Ole Miss, they'll beat you to death. So there's so many good athletes, especially in the Southeastern Conference. You can't take a breath. So there's something going on there. So.
Yeah. I tell you what, W's change a lot of thinking, though, don't they? And I wanted to ask you this before we move on. Everybody's ripping Jimbo Fisher for the offense there. It just doesn't look like it's state of the art, for want of another term. Do you agree with that from what you've watched of their offense? I mean, are they getting what they should be getting out of that kind of talent?
Yeah, I've heard that, and I actually went and watched a little bit of it. Jimbo Fisher has a reputation, and deservedly so, as an excellent offensive coach. They won a national championship. He had James Winston when he was there.
Yeah.
He was an assistant coach, I believe, won a national championship at LSU. So he's football acumen is very high. I don't know him very well, but I know people that know him, and very good offensive acumen. But the rotating quarterbacks, they've had issues in the offensive line where people have been hurt. I see different numbers in the offensive line constantly, and then also you see a rotation of 3 quarterbacks. And this young quarterback is supposed to be a tremendous talent. So I don't know if you just say, let's go and ride with him. But, offensively, I faced the challenge too, because I ran my offense for so long and I was very stubborn. And then I hired a guy like Ryan, because think about the coordinators I had. I had Dan Mullen, tremendous coach. And then Tom Herman did a great job for us. And then we got a little stale, and I let Ryan. I understood we needed to get things going a little bit. And Ryan Day brought that whole crossing package in the passing game. He brought some, the way he understands how to attack downfield. So I kind of handed a lot of things to Ryan Day. I'm not sure. Maybe that's what needs to happen down there. Once again, I'm not in that program, so I'm not completely sure.
Yeah. Well, hey, something's got to go on. I mean, I grew up in that area, as you know, East Texas, and a bunch of my buddies went to A&M, went to Texas A&M, and I'm telling them, they aren't happy.
Yeah, football's important there, man.
Oh yeah, baby. You ought to see that airport, on game day. I mean, at the Texas A&M airport, right down the street, it's loaded with big time jets. But and that tells you all you need to know. With that in mind, just a quickie. What's the most disappointing team in the country so far here halfway through this season? What can you put your finger on one? Texas A&M would be in the running for that, but Arkansas was really hyped, going into the year. Wisconsin has had its struggles, but it's bouncing back now. Where would you put that onus? Disappointing team.
Well, there's 2 in my mind that were top 5 teams, and that was Texas A&M and Notre Dame.
Yeah.
Top 5, 6 teams that, once again, to say there's not talent. That's every time I hear that, I'm like, come on now, don't go there. Of course there's talent. Now it might be different talent in the system and and all that you have to work through. So those are the 2 that you just think and you watch them and it just doesn't look great.
Yeah.
I think Marcus Freeman eventually will get. I know he will. If they just be patient with him, and first time head coach at the University of Notre Dame. Think about that for a minute.
Yeah.
Here you go. I was a first time coach at Bowling Green, and thank God there wasn't. We weren't on TV all the time, because the mistakes that are made your first time as a head coach are very. But he's a really smart guy. You just got to make sure you got the right coaching staff. But those 2 teams are the teams you thought would be right in the middle of this thing.
Yeah, that's a good point. I had forgotten about Notre Dame. That's how disappointing they are. They play at Syracuse this week. That'll be an interesting little test, because, man, wow. I just, like you just said, I'm not sure Notre Dame is a place you want to learn how to be a head coach. I mean, just seems like, and I blame Notre Dame for that more than I blame Marcus Freeman. I don't know about you. I mean, I'm trying to get a little fracas going here, but don't you? I mean, you're taking a real shot there, aren't you?
You are, but I think it was an educated shot. I think the players, from what I understand, was very involved in that. Obviously, he's recruiting at a high level right now, so we're going to see it come to fruition. What goes into selection of a football coach is so deep. Obviously, the guy down south of us in Cincinnati is a Catholic guy and a Catholic family, and that's everybody kind of thought that's where Notre Dame might go, but that didn't materialize. So, I saw Bob Davie, who's not a good coach. He's a great coach. People might say, "What are you talking?" He is a great football coach. I was there with him, and he took over for Lou Holtz in Notre Dame. And I mean, the weight of the world is every morning you wake up, you're the head coach of Notre Dame, and every scenario is kind of new. How do I handle this? How do I handle this? How do I handle this? And once again, thank God, when I was 36 or 35 at Bowling Green, I'm glad it was Bowling Green
Yeah.
because a couple of times, like, man, I shouldn't have done. That's not the way to handle this situation.
Yeah. Yeah. You didn't have 50 media members up your at your excuse me. Yeah. At your press conference. Yeah. Coach, what the hell are you doing? Hey, yeah. Hey, well, let's move on. Illinois is now the team to beat in the Big Ten. Speaking of the flip side of surprises, how are you squaring that in your head? And how crazy is the Big Ten West right now as we speak?
Well, I have respect for Rep Bielema. Jerry DiNardo, who's been around the Big B10, by the way, a great man and a great friend of mine, called this. He called this a year ago because he goes to all the practices and the way Bielema handles his practices. He has a system. It failed at Arkansas, but I'm sure he adapted to a degree. But we got in. If you remember, I first got to the Big Ten in 2012. We had a little Wisconsin, something about recruiting, but
yeah,
we moved on and we get along fine. And I have a lot of respect from his coach. Here's the thing I think that I'd like the viewers and everybody just contemplate this for a minute. In 2 years from now, the Big Ten is going to no longer have divisions. Do you realize that eliminates about 7 teams from ever playing in the Big Ten championship game?
Yep.
But the other side of the coin is you're going to get the best 2 teams in the championship game. So is it going to be Ohio State versus the Wolverines? Is it going to be, there's a small window of teams that can ever play in that game now. The imbalance in the Big Ten is far greater than most conferences.
Yeah.
The SEC that, there's 7, 8 teams that think they can win a national title in the SEC. And the Big Ten, the group of teams that were so good, Wisconsin, Iowa, Michigan State, those teams right there, Penn State's still right there. But
yeah,
when those 3 teams are struggling, to me, the Big Ten doesn't look like the Big Ten anymore.
Yeah.
Wisconsin's a top 15 program. So is Michigan State. And I think that obviously they'll be back. But this year, it just doesn't look great, the Big Ten, because of those 3 teams are usually top 15 programs.
Yeah. I talked about that on my podcast this week with my guest, Dave Jones, who's been covering Penn State for 3.5 decades. He was in Columbus before that, worked at our paper. But the point I made up is, do we really want to see, like, this year would be a great example. If games keep going the way you think they're going, the way it's going to go, there's a huge collision coming the last weekend of November, Ohio State and Michigan. Do we really want to see them play back to back, weekends, down in the future? I mean, I'm not sure I do. I'm not sure as a head coach you want to play a team and then the next week play them again, do you?
No, absolutely not. But
yeah.
Once again, and this is one of the little issues I have with college football right now. The first words that comes out of everyone's mouth right now is money.
Yeah.
And whether it be about a player, whether it be about a coach, whether it be about the conference. And, I don't want to be that old gray-haired guy like me and you are and say, well, back then it was about educate. Woody Hayes always talked about education. He talked about the rival. I don't ever remember Woody Hayes talking about, think about how old we sound when I say that.
Dude, he turned down raises. Are you kidding me?
That's what we grew up in. And I don't want to be that hypocrite that's, well, coach, you made a lot of money, and coach, I get that. But do we want to see the rivalry game back to back? And imagine the pressure on those 2 coaches coaching that, and more importantly, the players that are performing on the field. So, okay, I just played you last week, and I'm looking at you again.
Yeah.
So that's tough.
At a neutral site, but it's always, as well as anyone, it's hard to beat somebody 2 times in 1 year, much less back-to-back games. That would be,
well, once again, the higher ups are, the conversation is going to be about money.
Yeah, exactly.
What's the viewership? Because Fox is going to broadcast them both.
Yeah.
I don't want to speak for Fox, but Fox wants to, The one thing about that game, it's always the number one watched game on television. How
Yeah.
cool is that?
Yeah.
By far.
Yeah.
So they'll be fine with it.
Yeah. Oh, hell yeah. Hey, let's get to the checkmate moment. Finally here. In my opinion, a game, like you laid this out when we first started this many weeks ago. The checkmate moment might be a play call. It might be a faux pas, by a team, but it also might be a change in the middle of a game that changes that game, maybe changes your team's fortunes. And I thought a checkmate moment was when, and I don't know if you agree with me or not, was when Dabo Swinney and Clemson this past week, they were losing versus Syracuse in Death Valley, by the way, at Clemson. And DJ Ungalele wasn't basically hot that day, wasn't sharp, and had 3 turnovers, I think, in that game. But the point was, we went to Cade Klubnik, that freshman quarterback, and boom, Cade Klubnik saves the day. To a certain extent, played well. They came back and beat Syracuse, which at that point was undefeated. My point is, after that game, though, Dabo Swinney made a big point to say that DJ Ungalele was still his quarterback and stuff. To me, that's a checkmate moment because, number one, it kept their unbeaten season alive, kept their drive to get to the college football playoff alive. But then you're going back and saying, this guy's still my guy. How do you look at that? Is that a checkmate moment? It was definitely a checkmate moment for the game, but heading forward, have we seen a moment here in Clemson 2022 football history that's going to make or break them?
Yeah, the ultimate responsibility for the head coach on game day is game management, and many fail. I failed. Dabo's failed. Nick Saban has failed before. Ryan Day's failed before. We all have. And it's got to be so well thought out. I'm sure that scenario has been running through Coach Swinney's mind. He had to do it. He did it. And I don't know how many, that would be really, really hard to do. I've been faced with similar situations where there was maybe Dwayne Haskins and JT Barrett. And, you got this leader, you got this player that you love and you support, and he may be struggling. You pop another guy in there.
Yeah.
And he did it. And if it fails, you could lose your team. You certainly can lose your players. Now in this world of transfer portal, and I listened to what he said. I'm talking about Dabo Swinney about the quarterback and saying that he's still his quarterback, which is the right thing to say. But it's also don't think now that he's worried about if he struggles again. And I hear the stories about, is it fair to have a quarterback that's always looking over his shoulder? My comment was, yes, it's fair to have a center looking over his shoulder too.
Yeah.
Same with a middle linebacker. It's all about competition and winning. You're the quarterback of a top 5 program. Are you looking over your shoulder? Of course you are. As a head coach, you are. This is the most competitive environment that exists on the planet. So he made the right move. Obviously, it worked out. How this moves forward is going to be very intriguing. Their schedule is not tough the rest of the way, so they can manage it. But for the future, it's going to be really interesting to watch.
Hey, real quick though, once you've pulled a guy and put another guy in, and then you put that original guy back in as your starter the next week, does it make it easier in your mind, Urban, to pull that guy again? You understand what I'm saying? Meaning, it does, right? Once you kind of have a little breakthrough there, I would think human nature is, all right, man, I feel it again. This isn't clicking. Let's go with the backup again. That is possible, isn't it?
Yeah, I had 2 scenarios where I had Chris Leak and Tim Tebow down in Florida in 06. And I just decided that we're going to play them both. And I got a lot of criticism. You have 2 type A's, you have 2 guys that are well known. The team loves them. And I would, do you play Tim Tebow or do you play Chris Leak? And I said, me and Dan Mullins, we're going to play both. And it worked out. We won the national title. Then also in 2015, I had a guy that won the national championship, a guy named Cardell Jones, never lost a game as a starting quarterback.
Yeah.
And then you have JT Barrett, who's our leader, broke records after record, a guy that I personally had immense respect for because of his toughness and leadership. And Cardell struggled a little bit, especially on 3rd downs in red zone, because we didn't have that quarterback run ability because he wasn't a runner like JT. Yeah. And so I went to JT. And it wasn't, we lost that game. We went 13-1, but it wasn't smooth that year. So there, would I manage that differently? I actually reflect on this. I don't know. So Dabo's going to deal with the same thing. He's, especially the rest of the way here, and then especially in the off season.
Yeah, exactly. Ladies and gentlemen, another edition of Urban's Take is in the books. Urban, thanks for joining me, my man. I'll see you next week. And hey, have a happy time in Happy Valley, my man.
This is one of my favorite 15 minutes of the day of the week. So really appreciate it, Tim.
Yeah, and with Tim May, it's always more, 15 minutes, but it ends up being 30. That's just the way it goes, right? But hey, until next week, man, we'll see you then.